Hi, I'm Joe, and I'm a student of Bhante Chandana. Bhante is a wandering monk, and at the moment, he doesn't have a permanent home or a monastery. So he depends on the donation and generosity from his students and supporters. So if you find any of his videos helpful or beneficial to you and the people you know, please consider making a donation to him at the link below. Thank you so much and have a good day.
We live a life while we avoid, as much as we can, difficult situations, at the top of which are events that happen to us, with us involved, that could be best described as traumatic. Trauma is pain, has to do with pain. It could be physical, but the impact of the trauma goes far beyond the physical. In fact, that is where its most devastating impact lies. Sometimes it's even before a physical event has taken place. Meaning just the anticipation of dread, the fear of, oh my, this could befall me, this could happen, this is going to happen. Oh, is this going to happen? Oh, when is this going to happen? I better make sure that I am safe from it. It's like somebody who's running in a direction, but throughout the time that they're running in that direction, their head is turned backwards. They're looking over their shoulder as they're running in the opposite direction. I just gave you basically a visual of how I see trauma often, both in my life and having undergone trauma for many decades, lived through almost 2 decades of war and the impending doom, in a sense, destruction, re-experiencing of traumas as I lived in Lebanon in the time of war for almost 2 decades. So, but that stays with you. Even though nothing's happening, no one's coming and breaking your door in, they're not cutting your body into pieces, or they're not threatening you per se physically, but the fear of it is quite present for many people. Of course, today's society has been exposed. Many people have not experienced trauma physically per se, but we have been exposing ourselves. In fact, we are given the illusion that it is something that we control. Like you go into a movie theater and you're watching a horror movie or a suspenseful movie or Netflix and something like that, and you're watching something, a movie, and most of the movies are turning into horror-ridden, worst-case scenario. People want to be at the edge of their seat. But there is that illusion that once they have control, basically, that's the illusion, that they can switch the power off, turn the channel, leave the theater, and it's all gone. That's not necessarily the case, because something happened biochemically in the brain, in the body. Your blood circulation is different. Your heart rate is different. Your blood glucose levels are different. Your muscles are acting different. Your eyes are moving differently. You're going to sleep differently, depending on what was triggered. So of course, in our culture, and I spent most of my life trying to avoid trauma, as one can anticipate. However, we often neglect to consider that trauma can also be healing. Trauma can be healing. If we apply some tools, if you eat cayenne pepper, or if you eat habanero peppers, or something, or even like salt, you don't put the whole container, the salt shaker, into the bowl of soup you're making. You just put enough. Same thing with the other spices. They have healing qualities, properties. Cayenne pepper has healing properties. Pungent flavors have healing properties when you're using them wisely, given the situation. If you study Ayurveda, or if you speak with someone who knows, or read a book on Ayurveda, most experts will tell you that it will help to take a pungent herb, some spices, something like ginger, which has drying effect as well as pungent qualities and properties. And it's one of the tools that they use in Ayurvedic medicine, in TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, etc., to help to, let's say, reduce the flu symptoms or cold. I'm just pointing one thing. It's like to help your digestion, etc., etc. It's a cleanse, but you don't go around dumping the whole container of salt or these spices. You use wisdom. If we are born, and if you're able to listen to this talk and hear me speak on this, it means you are alive, so you have been born. Okay, that's one point that's established. If we're born, therefore we are going to, at least at one point or another, experience traumatic events, trauma. Sometimes big, sometimes small, sometimes micro. But trauma nevertheless. Instead of running, instead of trying to make life completely immune, empty of all trauma, all types of trauma, which is impossible, and spend the rest of your life like that runner that I was mentioning, running in one direction but has their head turned backwards. That's no life. Always trying to be prepared for impending doom. That's no life. So, how do you apply? What techniques would you apply to turn trauma into a blessing, into something that could heal you? Once you've made sure that you have done your best to avoid situations that could be traumatic, meaning you are protecting yourself, you're not doing anything that would put you in harm's way. So that's the establishing, that's the foundation. Once you've done that, aside from that, when you notice the mind, especially when I say the mind, I mean the perceptions. In Buddhism, perception is the big one, the real evil one, if you think. Don't look for evil outside in the world. Yes, of course there are, people that behave and do evil things. First themselves, they don't know this, but they think they're doing it to others to get what they want, to be happy at the cost of others. Yes, that's true. Anyone who says otherwise is deluded. But ultimately, in Buddhism, what we work towards is to, first of all, find out, uncover the real evil, which is always going to be within one's own heart, so long as the person is not awakened. That's where the term nibbana comes in, or nirvana, which is you are freed from that movement of constant agitation within the heart. You are freed from that prison of the, what we call, Lord Buddha mentions it, it's kilesa. Kilesa are the defilements. There's 3 of them. I've mentioned them countless times in talks. But just to recap, lobha, which you can translate it as greed, the wanting, yearning, the passionate, it's never satisfied. You always want that thing. It never stops. The moment you obtain something that you wanted, there's something else already on the screen for you to go get. So the second one is dosa. Dosa is hatred, anger, wanting to cause harm, not being okay with something, resentful, you can also say that. All of these have their essence being dosa. So this is the second poison. The third one is moha, which is delusion, which is, you can even call it, in cases of living experiences, indifference even. To find out, to want to know, to really get to the bottom of things. Those are aspects of removing yourself from that third poison, which is delusion, or removing it from your heart. That's why these are not necessarily actual physical material things found within the physical heart, by the way. Heart, we use it loosely here. It's not referring to the actual physical organ in the heart, in the body that pumps blood and things. Heart is, sometimes it's translated as mind. The Pali term for it is chitta. And that is where Nibbana happens. Lord Buddha says how the heart is luminous, bhikkhus. Pabbasara bhikkhave chittam. the heart is luminous. It's simply covered up by these corruptions, by these defilements. It's like a light bulb that works beautifully. In fact, it's even lit up, but it's covered up in thick layers of mud that have solidified. Now, sometimes it's so solid, it's been thickly, pasted on. Pasted because we don't want to do anything about it, to uncover it. And that's why moha is the worst of those three I mentioned. Because moha tells you, convinces you that there's nothing for you to change. And it always points to the direction outward, away from you. Evil outside of you. For you to go outside and fix that first. The world first, and then you. No. No. It's you first. You must take care of yourself first. You have to put the mask on you first, as they say on the airplane. And then you tend to the needs of those who depend on you, next to you. After. So, when you're looking at the trauma, it's all about maintaining a middle path. Because on one end, you're looking at yourself as a person to whom these things are happening. That's one extreme. It's a fact, yes. It has happened, and it's, one can sit down and prove to you, but with evidence, with data, that this is what's happened. If somebody does something horrible to you, that happened. But the problem is becoming a victim to that way of thinking and turning that into the rubric of life, to the rubric of experiences to follow from that point on, the standard of this is it. That is an extreme. Which pushes you to the other, either of that or it's like a pendulum. Which pushes you to look also at the other, quote unquote, the world, situations, people, my karma. People a lot of time blame their karma. Kamma in Pali means action. What they mean or refer to are the vipakas, the outcome of kamma, which is basically not just action per se, but intentionally committed actions by the individual, knowingly committed actions. But this is where we get confused, because we take away, in either of these extremes, when you're a victim, yes, I'm going to be alone in my worries, in my pain, in my trauma, and you over there, the world, you don't have any of that. I'm detached from reality. I've excluded myself, extricated myself from the reality, the fabric of reality. And this is what I mean by coming back to the middle. This is the middle path, the way I understand it. When we're looking at it through the eyes of how to get rid of trauma as such. Looking at the middle. This gives us power. This gives us the power of choice. This is true choice. Where you are looking and seeing, you're no longer lying to yourself, you're no longer getting fixated either. You're observing. You're observing. And this is where your delusion gets to be those layers, those thick cake of mud that I was mentioning, covering up the light bulb, the brilliantly lit up light bulb. Slowly, slowly, you start to wet that muddy cake, cemented, and it starts to peel off like hot wax. Comes off. And then you see a little bit of something underneath it, a glow through that thick mud. That's what happens in the mind, the chitta. when you become forgiving, that's how your dosa, the hatred or the anger, the resentment in the heart, that portion of the muddy part of the, the light bulb image, it peels off like hot wax. And same thing with the greed. Do I really need this? Do I really need to have this? Do I really need to go crazy over this, obtaining this? What you're doing, therefore, is you putting a wall, a separation between yourself and those things, because we ultimately are the best traumatizers of ourselves. We traumatize ourselves. The event has taken place years ago, perhaps, but we know how to get under our own skin, as it were. This is why I was mentioning in Buddhism, sanya or perception has such a powerful role to play. To keep us in trauma, to keep us in darkness, to keep us constantly poisoning ourselves with those three kilesas I was mentioning, the defilements or poisons. Now, to see this already indicates that your moha is being removed. The more you do this, the more you're going to wipe off, remove layers and layers and layers of that hot wax or the mud. And you're going to see brighter and brighter and brighter heart, brighter mind. You're going to be able to see, you yourself, that yes, the trauma did happen, but I don't need to re-traumatize myself. This is when you are releasing yourself from the prison. Oftentimes people don't realize that Nibbana itself is not a state out there, over there, or in a different dimension of being, some type of a heavenly realm. In Buddhism even, you have hundreds of millions of people who believe that, unfortunately, because that's the product of a lazy mind. That's why even today so many people have a hard time attaining it, experiencing that sense of release, that freedom of heart, freedom of mind, because they place Nibbana outside of themselves. Well, Nibbana means also liberation. It means release. Release from what? Not just release from the body, because you experience, because many people have been interpreting it as a release from the body, and then you're attaining Nibbana. Completely wrong view, by the way. Has nothing to do with what the Buddha taught. Nothing to do with Buddhism. You're releasing yourself from suffering. Who's suffering? You're suffering. Who's inflicting that suffering upon you? Aha. Now we're in trauma land. Who is the real author of the trauma? Ultimately. That's the key, ultimately. What's that for? Well, to show us that the world, yes, it's going to be traumatizing, as I was saying in the beginning, but you're releasing yourself from that cycle of going around in circles, inflicting pain upon you. Pain and maintaining delusion go hand in hand. That's why delusion is the worst of the three kilesas, the three defilements, delusion. Because delusion says, I cannot do anything about this, so I'm going to now engage in a battle. Which does not need to happen, by the way. How do I do this? I really love looking at things pragmatically, and it's a how-to methods I love, because too much talking without action, it's like you need to, like in therapy, I would always give actual step-by-step things for patients to engage in, to do. It's not just intellectual stuff. That's why I don't think of therapy as talk therapy. Psychotherapy, as many people still are convinced of that, but that's not how it's supposed to be. The person wanting to heal, they need to start to heal themselves. And that requires some level of doing, mental doing, verbal doing, and physical doing. So in this case, a tool that could be really powerful at our hands would be, in turning trauma into a blessing, is to bring in sati, bring in the aspect of staying with what is taking place in the heart, in the mood you're in the feelings that are happening. You can only have one feeling at a time, but they're very quick. They're very fast. So sometimes it feels like you have several feelings going at the same time, or thoughts that are happening at the same time. They're not happening at the same time, but they're so quick. When you are practicing sati, or maintaining that awareness, oftentimes referred to as mindfulness, but it kind of became trivialized in this, society of ours. It's a catchphrase that has lost its essence, its true meaning, as designed by Lord Buddha. But you can bring that into your life, in spite of all that, and stay with your body, because you need an anchor point. You need some base for your sati, for your, maintaining that awareness. If you're having a negative thought, if you're having a negative emotion, let's go even into that. If you're having a strong sense of jealousy, let's say, or anger, a battle has started within you. That battle, figuratively speaking, manifests also biochemically within the body. The heart rate is up. Even your skin tone changes. Your capillaries that carry blood all the way to the surface of your skin to allow you to be, and they behave differently. Your eyes function differently. Your hearing changes. Your focus changes. What's happening? You're still fighting with that thought. You're still fighting with what? That perception, the image, the possibility of impending doom. And that's why your anger is not going away. It's getting intensified, in fact. So here is a technique where you can bring in sati immediately to the body. Just bring it anywhere where it is the loudest. Where it is the most pronounced, where you feel it most, basically. It's easier to connect or reconnect to the body than it is to perceptions, to thoughts. That's why Lord Buddha would always start with the body, depending on the level of maturity in their practice of meditation. Some people have a knack, some people have a more ease with just identifying even the feelings, which is a step higher than just focusing on the body. So they can just easily follow when I give instructions. They are able to identify the feeling and stay with the feeling versus the body. They also feel the body, but they're easily able to lock on with sati, with that awareness. And they notice how the feeling starts, the middle section of that feeling, how it gets intense. It seems like it's not going away. And then they see how it ends. But typically, when we're starting to watch, and the same thing happens also with watching sensations on the body, let's say the breath coming in, the origin, point of origin, the beginning, the middle portion of the breath, and the ending of the breath. The same thing, obviously, with the thoughts, etc. But what happens with beginners when you're beginning in any of these? These are, by the way, in case you're interested in going deeper into this and researching it, it's called the Satipatthana. Satipatthana, it comes from the two suttas, Satipatthana Sutta and Mahasatipatthana Sutta. One is in the Majjhima Nikaya, the book, discourses I'm talking about now, of Lord Buddha. And the other one is from the Digha Nikaya. That's the longer version, the Mahasatipatthana. These are the four establishments or four foundations of mindfulness. This is where we get mindfulness from, okay? Despite what other people have said or have been saying and selling millions of books and making, billion-dollar empires out of it. So anyhow, coming back, most people will start coming back to that beginning, middle, and end portion of that arch of experiencing the breath or the feeling. So I was mentioning the feeling. Let's go back to the feeling. When I have someone, let's say, or you practice this also, when you're breathing or when you're experiencing rather a feeling, usually we might, by the time that we become aware that this is the feeling I'm experiencing, we usually grab it at the tail end of it. When it's about to die, when it's ending. If this is the case, then it means your sati is good, but it's not that good because you're not sharp enough to catch it in the middle, when it's really intense. That's when we are completely sucked into the experience, where we're fighting, and the blood pressure, the body temperature also, and the mind already, it's gone into a berserk mode. It's so agitated. So the more you do this, it's like any exercise that you do with your body. The more you do it, the more you're going to build those muscles. It creates a healthy habit of, the mind works in associations. So part of the brain will go ahead and say, oh, I'm feeling emotions that are intense. What was that thing that I was doing? Something that goes along with it. Oh yeah, becoming aware of it. So that transition, that time gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and now you're able to catch it clearly in a crisp way. You see it, the ending of that feeling or that emotion specifically, but you also are able to take a peek into the middle of that. You're able to go into that hot moment of that intense emotion. You're no longer absent to it. That's what I'm trying to say. So now this is where your sati is growing and it's expanding. It's like a ripple started at the middle of the lake and it's now expanding. And the more you do this, now you're getting closer and closer to the beginning portion of that emotion. You're seeing better and better what triggered the moment of the point of origin or origination of that emotion. So this is where you are uncovering what's really happening. You start seeing as to what triggered that re-traumatizing of yourself. Maybe you saw a picture, Maybe you heard a sound. Maybe it was a memory. Suddenly you start to see how the mind works. Lord Buddha had a phrase for this. He called this yata bhutang pajanati. One starts to see how things come to be. In your mind, you're seeing it. And by this fact, you're also doing what? Remember the delusion, the kilesa I was mentioning, the mother of the other two, the three poisons? Kilesa of delusion, moha, gets less, gets less, gets less. And this is the way that you can start to live an enlightening life. Your days go by with wakefulness. Now, the peak of that emotion, again, emotion or feeling, I was mentioning jealousy or anger. These are emotions, but the feeling tone of it is painful. The intensity of it is a painful feeling. The arch that I was mentioning. The bigger the trauma, the more the rewards will be. But it will require more work to catch it in that process. So sati will become, that's why people who have experienced intense trauma can really progress pretty rapidly on this path. Because they can get to that point of becoming disenchanted by whatever the world is offering, because they've seen through, they've tasted some of the worst things that anyone could ever. That's why you have examples like Kisa Gotami and Lady Patachara from the earlier days. These were women who had seen so much trauma. One had lost her only son, whom she had finally after so many years of trying. She ran, carrying the dead body of her son to Lord Buddha. She had become so delusional. She lost it in a sense because of the intensity of the pain. She had gone hungry for days, carrying the corpse of her son from village to village, thinking that somebody must be there who has the cure for. She believed in her heart, she was so desperate, that some yogi will be able to help revive this bloated body, stinking body that she's carrying around. She didn't want to let go. That's trauma. So somebody finally takes pity on her and says, seeing this, and her hair is all disheveled, and people were beating her, throwing things at her, kicking her out of their villages and towns. So finally, they point her in the direction of where Lord Buddha was, and they say, if anyone can help, it's him. An old man takes pity on her and says, sympathizes and says, child, go in this direction. And she says, yes. She runs. And she rushes into the monastery, and people are sitting there. Lay people are sitting there. Lord Buddha was giving a Dhamma talk. And some of the people wanted to stop her, but Lord Buddha gestured for them to not, and just to allow her to come. So she comes and she places her son gently in front of Lord Buddha. She's in tears and she says, they told me you can save him. They told me you can you can help us. Can you? And Lord Buddha says, yes, I can help you. For the first time, she has a sigh of relief that someone can. And he says, what? Tell me, what? He says, Lord Buddha says, you need to go and get a handful of seeds, mustard seeds, from a house. She immediately rushes to go and says, hold on. Before you go, you need to know that the mustard seeds have to come from a household that has never had any deaths. Nobody in that family has ever died. Ever. She says, sure. And she rushes. She doesn't think it through. She's delusional. What are you going to do? She rushes. This is happening in Savatthi, village of Savatthi. Now it's called Shravasti. So she goes from door to door knocking, and they see her. She says, there's this Gautama, recluse. He's helping my son to heal and to wake up, and he needs some medicine. So the medicine actually is, the ingredients are all mustard seeds. Could you give me some mustard seeds, please? And they say, sure, child. So they go into the kitchen, they grab a handful of mustard seeds, and they're about to put it in her palms. You can imagine how dirty her palms are, but how eager to receive those mustard seeds they must have been. Begging those seeds. And she says, by the way, one thing, has anyone died in this household? That's the second requirement. And they become sad and they say, oh yes, our grandmother died last week. And she says, I can't use them then. So she goes to the next house. They say, oh, I'm sorry, our father died last year. Goes to the next house. As you might have figured out, she comes back empty-handed. She goes to the monastery, this time without running. Was she going to run? Already you can see the thick layers of mud, like wax, peeling away, falling away, melting away in her mind. And then she approaches Lord Buddha and she bows to him and she says, I understand, teacher. And Lord Buddha smiles to her. And she quietly lifts up her son, the body, and she goes and has the body cremated. She goes and washes herself, fixes her hair, covers herself because she was almost naked. They had beaten her this and that over the course of weeks that she had been running hungry. Drinks some water and she comes back and she bows, pays respect to Lord Buddha, and she says, Bhante, I am here. Please ordain me. So much pain in her heart, so much trauma. And there was also Patachara. Patachara's story for some might seem even worse than that. She had fallen in love with this man when she was still a young woman, against her parents' will. And so she marries outside her caste or class, and so she leaves her parents behind. They elope, in a sense, and they go live somewhere else. And he's poor. She's a rich man's daughter, but she loves him. So while she's pregnant with her first child, her husband says, well, why don't, or they say, well, it's custom for them to go to the mother's house. But because he doesn't have his parents and she has them, but they are in denial or refusing to see her, she changes her mind and she comes back. So they have that child. After some time, she gets pregnant again, and this time they really have to go because they really need help. So on the way, there's a torrential rain. The husband is with her child is with her, he's able to walk, and she's pregnant. The husband says, well, I need to go get some firewood because I need to keep you warm. So he goes they're in the forest, they're in the jungle, somewhere, they're traveling halfway to get to her parents' house. She's like, I don't care, I need my parents' support. They will accept me, they will accept me. So the husband is coming along with her because, like a family. So he goes in under a tree collecting some firewood, and underneath the dry leaves there's a cobra that jumps out and bites him. He dies on the spot. Meanwhile, she's somewhere under a tree, protected again from the rain, with her son and her unborn child in her. So she waits, and then she can't send her son because he's too young, so she says, wait here. So she goes looking for her husband. She's calling him out, like she's calling for him in the forest, and then no one's responding. And then she finally sees what had happened. Her husband is face down, dead. She starts sobbing, and then she realizes her son is over there. So she goes to him, and then she says, what are we going to do now? Well, the rain is getting worse, and now the river is flowing wildly. She says, the only way that I could do this is if I can actually go to the other side. Meanwhile, she has the baby. She does it on her own. She goes through labor alone. The river has to be crossed. The village is on the other side of the river. So, but she only has 2 arms. And it's beyond, she's neck deep in the water. So she says to her son, wait here, I'll come for you. I need to take your brother. She has a boy child, I think. So she carries her newborn baby over her head, and she walks through the gushing waters and somehow manages to reach the other side and places her newborn gently on the ground, and turns around and goes back into the water to go get her son, the older one. She's halfway in between, in the middle of the river. She hears a cry of an eagle. She turns around and she hears her son yelling and her baby crying from either banks. And her son is pointing, screaming in the opposite direction. And she's looking over at him, and then she turns around and she sees the eagle swoop down, grab hold of the newborn, and carrying the baby away to eat it. She starts rushing back to the baby. She doesn't even get to the edge, to the bank. And the eagle is gone with the baby in its claws. She's out of it. But at the same time, she's like, oh, my son is over there. So she turns around and she starts crying, screaming at her son, stay there, I'm coming. But because of the loudness of the water, the current, the waves, all the commotion, the son starts to think, jump in and swim here to me. So he jumps in the water without knowing how to swim. She rushes back into the water, and she doesn't even get halfway, and then she realizes her child, her first child, the older one, is now carried away with the river, dead, drowned. I don't know what any human being can do in such a situation. It's so unimaginably painful. So somehow she gathers herself and goes back to the other side and crosses the river. And now, empty-handed. She doesn't have any of them. She doesn't have her husband. She doesn't have her first child. She doesn't have the second child. All she has is herself, and she walks towards the village of her parents. But from afar, she sees a big commotion happening, and there's smoke, this, that, and then people are rushing away, and she says, what's happening? What's happening? And they say, oh, the house on top of the hill over there is burning. And she says, which house? They say, that house. They give the name, and she gets closer, and she wants to find out if that's the truth, because by the time she gets there, she realizes that it was her parents' house. Fire had started, and both her parents had died in that house fire. Only they had died in the village. It hadn't spread. So now she has nobody. If that is not traumatic, I don't know what is. This is intense. So Patachara eventually ends up half mad, half sane, somehow ends up at the monastery in front of Lord Buddha. And similar thing happens where she finally realizes, well, because Lord Buddha sees her tears and says some lovely words to her, because she came complaining about life, disillusioned about life, in such tremendous suffering, in such tremendous trauma. And then with his smile, gentle smile, and his words, she attains to the first level of awakening. Now, Patachara and Kisagotami both became arahants faster than many others. So these are, I'm sharing these stories, and I do like to go into details because people love stories. And these are not just, tales. These are real events that have taken place to fellow human beings who have undergone trauma, intense trauma. So, and I mention this because it also inspires students and listeners to kind of see beyond their own trauma, beyond their own difficulties, and how you can turn this around and turn your trauma into a blessing. And that is, Nibbana doesn't happen just like that because of you having trauma. No, you use the trauma. It's a fertilizer. You use the trauma to come out of the trauma. It teaches you. This is like the basis of being a wounded healer. Instead of being the case of hurt people hurting people. Someone who is hurt goes around hurting people. That's what we have in the world. Instead, you become healed people heal people. Those who have healed themselves go around healing people. And that's what the case was here in these two examples I shared. So I hope this inspires you, and use the sati, use the awareness. And you don't have to be practicing sitting meditation, watching the breath constantly in order for you to be meditating as such. No. The key thing is what happens between your sits. So when you're working in the kitchen, when you're in the bathroom, when you are going up and down stairs, when you're in the elevator, when you're in a board meeting, when you're writing a letter, an email, something, when you're greeting someone, when you're purchasing something at the market, use your body to tactile way to just, when you're touching the pen, the apple, the I don't know what, are you feeling it? Are you present to it? What are you feeling in your heart? Is it painful? Is it pleasant? Is it neutral? Is it dull? Is it indifference? Just be present to that. And you're going to notice it ending. The ending stage, the tail end of that experience you caught on to. But then what happens is, the next one, by the time that you catch on to it, it's already intense. So remember the arch? Beginning, middle, and end. So yes, we have a tendency of being able to see it more on the tail end, but eventually the more you do this, you'll see it at the more intense moment of it, when it's full-blown, intense. And then as you stay with that, you also become curious enough to catch it at the beginning point of origin. So the more you do this, the closer you get to Nibbana. Okay?